The mahogany table in Attorney Harrison's office gleamed under fluorescent lights that made everything feel cold and clinical. I sat across from my brother Blake, trying not to fidget with my worn jacket sleeves while he adjusted his Rolex for the third time in 10 minutes. Dad had been gone for 2 weeks. The funeral was a blur of forced handshakes and hollow condolences. But this was the moment I'd been dreading, the reading of Thomas Mitchell's will. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Attorney Harrison cleared his throat and opened the leather-bound document. To my eldest son, Blake Mitchell, I leave the family estate at 1247 Oakwood Drive, including the mansion, all furnishings, the boathouse, and the adjoining 15 acres of land. Blake's smile was immediate and smug. He'd been expecting this his whole life. The golden boy who'd followed Dad into real estate, who'd married the right woman, who'd given Dad grandchildren. Of course he got everything. And to my youngest son, Daniel Mitchell, Harrison paused, flipping through pages, I leave my personal effects, and that concludes the distribution of assets. The words hit me like a physical blow. Personal effects. That was it. 32 years of being Thomas Mitchell's son, and I was worth a box of old watches and cufflinks. Blake couldn't hide his satisfaction. Sorry, Danny. Maybe Dad figured you'd just blow it on another one of your failed art projects anyway. I wanted to say something back, but my throat felt like sandpaper. This wasn't just about money. It was about belonging, about finally having proof that I mattered to the man who'd spent decades making me feel invisible. But then Attorney Harrison held up a hand. Actually, there's something else. Mr. Mitchell left specific instructions that a secondary document should only be opened if Daniel was present for the initial reading. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting. Blake's smile faltered. What secondary document? He never mentioned anything about… Blake, Harrison interrupted gently. Your father was very specific. This was to remain sealed until this exact moment. As Harrison's letter opener sliced through the envelope, something in the room shifted. The confident smirk disappeared from Blake's face, replaced by something I'd rarely seen from my older brother. Uncertainty. I had no idea that envelope contained information that would turn everything I thought I knew about my family upside down. But more than that, it would reveal a side of my father I never knew existed, and show me that sometimes the people who seem to care the least are actually protecting you from truths too dangerous to share. Harrison unfolded the letter carefully, his eyebrows raising slightly as he read the first few lines silently. This is unusual. Mr. Mitchell has requested that Daniel come to a specific location before any further details can be disclosed. He looked up at me. Daniel, are you familiar with 432 Pine Street? The address meant nothing to me, but I watched Blake's face go pale. Pine Street? That's downtown, near the old warehouse district. Your father has left instructions for you to meet someone there tomorrow at 2 p.m., a Mr. Eugene Winters. Harrison folded the letter back up. That's all I'm authorized to share at this time? Blake stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Who is Eugene Winters? Dad never mentioned anyone by that name. I'm afraid I don't have additional information, Harrison replied diplomatically. Mr. Mitchell was very specific about the protocol. As we left the law office, Blake grabbed my arm in the parking lot. Danny, this doesn't make sense. Dad was always straightforward about business. Why all the mystery? For the first time in years, I saw something other than condescension in my brother's eyes. He looked genuinely confused, maybe even worried. I don't know, I said honestly, but I guess I'll find out tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the past few months before Dad died. He'd seemed different, quieter, more thoughtful. I'd attributed it to his declining health, but now I wondered if there was something else going on. I remembered one conversation we'd had about 6 weeks before he passed. I'd been visiting him at the house, and he'd asked me about my photography business. Not in his usual dismissive way, but with genuine interest. You know, Daniel, he'd said, staring out the window at the garden Mom used to tend. Sometimes we think we're protecting people by keeping them at a distance. But maybe we're just protecting ourselves. I thought it was the morphine talking. Dad wasn't one for philosophical conversations, especially not with me. But lying in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling, those words felt heavier somehow. The next afternoon, I drove downtown to Pine Street. The address led me to a modest office building, wedged between a coffee shop and a used bookstore. The directory in the lobby listed E. Winters, private investigator on the 3rd floor. A private investigator? What could Dad possibly have needed with a PI? I took the stairs, my heart pounding harder with each step. The hallway smelled like old carpet and coffee. I found the door marked Winters Investigations and knocked. "Come in," called a gravelly voice. Eugene Winters was not what I expected. Maybe 65, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was tidy but lived in, with filing cabinets that looked like they'd seen decades of use. "Daniel Mitchell," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I've been waiting for this day for 3 years." 3 years? He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Your father hired me in 2021, said he needed to find someone, but it had to be done carefully. Very carefully." He opened a thick file folder. "Daniel, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but your father wanted you to know the truth, even if he couldn't tell you himself." My mouth went dry. "What truth?" Winters pulled out a photograph and slid it across the desk. It showed a woman I'd never seen before, maybe in her 40s, with dark hair and a gentle smile. She was standing next to a young girl who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. "Daniel," Winters said quietly, "meet your sister." The photograph felt like it was burning my fingers. "My sister? That's impossible. I don't have a sister." Winters leaned back in his chair, his expression sympathetic but serious. "Your father had an affair 23 years ago. The woman's name is Sarah Coleman. She lives in Portland with her daughter, your half-sister, Emma." My head was spinning. "Dad? An affair? You're telling me my father, who lectured me about responsibility and family values my entire life, had an affair?" "It gets more complicated," Winters continued. "Sarah never told him about Emma. Your father only discovered he had another daughter 3 years ago when Sarah reached out. She'd been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's and was trying to get her affairs in order." I stared at the photo of the little girl, Emma. She had Dad's eyes, the same gray-blue eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. "Why didn't he tell us?" "Because he was terrified," Winters said simply. "Your father spent 3 years trying to figure out how to be part of Emma's life without destroying the family he already had. He was paying for Sarah's medical care, Emma's schooling, everything. But he was paralyzed by guilt and fear." He pulled out another document, bank statements showing monthly transfers of $5,000 to an account in Portland. The payments had been going on for 3 years, right up until Dad's death. "This is why Blake got everything," I realized aloud. Dad was already supporting another family. "Partly, yes. But there's more." Winters opened another section of the file. "Your father was planning to tell you and Blake about Emma. He'd written letters to both of you, explaining everything. But he wanted to meet with Emma first, to make sure she was okay with having brothers she'd never known about. He handed me a letter with my name on it in Dad's handwriting. He never got the chance to give you this." My hands shook as I opened it. "Daniel, if you're reading this, then Eugene has done what I asked him to do. I know you must be shocked and probably angry. You have every right to be. I've been a coward, son. I've spent 3 years knowing I had a daughter I'd never met, and I didn't know how to bridge that gap without hurting the people I love. You and Blake are my sons, and I'm proud of both of you, even if I've been terrible at showing it. But Emma is my daughter too, and she's growing up without knowing she has a father who loves her. By the time you read this, I'll be gone, and that chance will be lost forever. I'm not leaving you the mansion or the money, because Emma and Sarah need it more right now. Sarah's condition is worsening, and Emma will need support for college, for her future. But what I am leaving you is something more important. The chance to be the brother I never taught you how to be. Emma doesn't know about you yet. Sarah wanted to wait until I was ready to be a real father, not just a check in the mail. Now that decision falls to you. You can walk away, pretend this letter never existed, and no one would blame you. Or you can choose to be the family she's never had. I know I'm asking a lot. I know I haven't earned the right to ask anything of you. But Danny, You've always had a heart bigger than mine. You've always been the one who sees people for who they really are, not who they're supposed to be. If anyone can figure out how to love a stranger like family, it's you. The choice is yours, son. But whatever you decide, know that you were never less important to me than Blake. You were just different, and I was too scared and stupid to appreciate what that meant until it was too late. Love, Dad. P.S. Eugene has all the contact information for Sarah and Emma. He also has a key to a storage unit where I've been keeping things for Emma. Photo albums from your childhood that I wanted her to see. Videos of you and Blake growing up, so she'd know her brothers, even if she never met them. I sat there staring at the letter, tears blurring my vision. Everything I thought I knew about my father, about my place in his life, had just shifted completely. Daniel? Winter's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you okay? I looked up at him, then back at the photo of Emma. She was smiling in the picture, gap-toothed and happy, completely unaware that somewhere across the country she had 2 older brothers she'd never met. She doesn't know about us? Not yet. Sarah wanted to respect your father's wishes about timing. She's been waiting for word about what to tell Emma. I thought about all the years I'd felt like an outsider in my own family. All the times Blake got the attention, the praise, the assumption that he'd inherit everything. I'd spent decades feeling like I wasn't enough for Dad, but here was proof that Dad hadn't just been thinking about his existing family. He'd been carrying the weight of another whole life, another person who needed him. And instead of abandoning her, he'd been quietly taking care of her while trying to figure out how to bring our worlds together. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. There's one more thing, Winters said gently. Your father set up a trust fund for Emma's education. The house and assets Blake inherited? They're not actually Blake's yet. The will has a clause that everything goes to Emma if Blake doesn't agree to honor the trust your father established for her. I looked up sharply. Blake doesn't know this? Not yet. Your father wanted you to have the choice of how to handle this information. You could tell Blake, or you could make the decision yourself about Emma's future. For the first time in my life, I held all the cards. Blake thought he'd won everything. But the truth was, Dad had given me something much more powerful. The ability to choose what kind of family we were going to be. I spent 2 days staring at Emma's photo and reading Dad's letter over and over. Finally, I knew what I had to do, but it meant having a conversation with Blake that I'd been avoiding my entire life. I called him and asked to meet at the mansion, the house where we'd grown up, where Dad had died, where Blake now lived like some kind of entitled king. When I pulled up the circular driveway, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest that came with being back in a place where I'd never quite belonged. Blake opened the front door wearing a golf shirt and that same smug expression he'd worn at the attorney's office. Let me guess, you want to negotiate for some of Dad's stuff? The watch collection? We need to talk, I said, walking past him into the foyer. The house looked exactly the same. Expensive furniture, family photos that featured mostly Blake, the oil painting of our grandfather that Dad had commissioned years ago. Danny, if this is about money, it's about Emma. Blake froze. Who's Emma? I pulled out the photograph and handed it to him. Our sister? For a moment, Blake just stared at the picture. Then he looked at me like I'd lost my mind. What kind of sick joke is this? It's not a joke. I sat down on the leather sofa without being invited. Dad hired a private investigator 3 years ago. He had an affair, Blake. Emma is his daughter. Blake's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, disbelief, anger. That's impossible. Dad would never. He was married to Mom for 34 years. He lectured us about commitment and he made a mistake, I interrupted. A mistake that resulted in a 9-year-old girl who doesn't know she has a father or 2 older brothers. I told him everything Winters had told me. About Sarah, about Alzheimer's, about the monthly payments Dad had been making. I watched Blake's world crumble in real time. So that's why he left you nothing, Blake said finally. He was already supporting them. That's part of it. But there's something else you need to know. I pulled out the copy of the trust documentation Winters had given me. The inheritance isn't actually yours, Blake. Not completely. Blake snatched the papers from my hands, his eyes scanning the legal language. What the hell is this? It's a contingency clause. If you don't agree to honor the trust Dad set up for Emma's education and Sarah's care, everything goes to Emma instead. The color drained from Blake's face. He can't do that. I'm his son. I've worked in his business for 15 years. You what? I stood up, feeling decades of frustration finally bubbling over. You followed his plan? You became exactly what he wanted you to become? Well, congratulations, Blake. You got the life you were handed. But Emma? She didn't get anything. Not a father. Not a family. Not even the knowledge that she belongs somewhere. Blake was quiet for a long moment, staring at the trust documents. How much? What? How much does she get? The trust fund. $200,000 for college, $50,000 annually for Sarah's care until, I couldn't finish the sentence, until she dies. Blake's voice was flat. Dad was paying for all of this out of pocket? For 3 years. While you were complaining that he wasn't giving you enough responsibility at the company. Blake walked to the window overlooking the garden Mom had planted before she died. I don't understand. Why not just tell us? Why all the secrecy? Because he was scared, I said simply. Scared of losing the family he had while trying to help the family he'd abandoned. So what happens now? Blake turned back to me. You're going to take everything away from me for some kid I've never met? That's not what this is about. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. Blake, do you remember when Mom died? His expression softened slightly. Of course I remember. You were 24, I was 19, and Dad just shut down. He worked all the time, barely spoke to us, acted like showing emotion was a sign of weakness. He was grieving. We all were. But you adapted. You became the son he needed you to be. You stepped into Mom's role of managing the family stuff, the social expectations, all of it. I paused. I never could do that. I never knew how to be what he wanted. Blake was quiet. But this little girl? She needs someone to choose her. Not because it's easy or expected, but because it's right. I looked at the photo of Emma again. Dad spent 3 years being too scared to choose. I'm not going to make the same mistake. So you're going to what? Become her big brother? Move to Portland and play house with strangers? I don't know yet. Maybe. Or maybe I'll bring her here. Blake laughed bitterly. Here? To what? Split custody with you? Why not? I stood up again. This house has 6 bedrooms, Blake. Emma could have her own space, a yard to play in, access to good schools. Sarah could get better medical care here than she can afford in Portland. You're talking about turning our childhood home into some kind of halfway house for Dad's guilty conscience. I'm talking about turning it into what it should have been all along. A place where family takes care of family, even when it's complicated. Blake stared at me for a long moment. You really think you can just waltz into this kid's life and fix everything Dad screwed up? No, I said honestly. I think it's going to be messy and difficult and probably painful for everyone involved. But Blake, we have a sister. A 9-year-old sister, who's about to lose the only parent she's ever known to a disease that's going to steal her memories piece by piece. I picked up my jacket and headed toward the door. You have a choice to make. You can fight the trust, hire lawyers, and spend years battling over money while Emma grows up, knowing her father's other family wanted nothing to do with her. Or you can be the big brother she's going to need. I paused at the front door. But either way, I'm going to Portland next week. I'm going to meet our sister. And I'm going to make sure she knows that Dad didn't abandon her, even if he never figured out how to be her father while he was alive. Blake didn't say anything as I left, but I could feel him watching me drive away. For the first time in our lives, the ball was in my court, and we both knew it. 3 days later, my phone rang at 6 a.m. Blake's name flashed on the screen. "I'm coming with you," he said without preamble. "What?" "To Portland. I want to meet her." I sat up in bed, trying to process this. "Blake, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice was different, quieter, less certain than usual. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing her. And, Danny, I've been looking at Emma's photo for 3 days straight." I was quiet, letting him talk. "She has Mom's nose," he continued. "Did you notice that? And Dad's stubborn chin. She looks like family, Danny. She looks like us." "So you'll honor the trust?" "I'll do better than that." I heard papers rustling in the background. "I called Harrison yesterday. I'm transferring the house to a family trust. If Sarah and Emma want to move here, they can. If they want to stay in Portland, the house becomes an asset to fund Emma's future." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Blake, that's your inheritance. That's everything Dad left you." "No," he said firmly. "Everything Dad left me was the business, the connections, the education to run that business. The house was always just a house." "But Emma?" "She's family. And the family doesn't get left behind." 2 days later, Blake and I stood outside a modest ranch house in a quiet Portland neighborhood. I'd called Sarah the night before to explain who we were and ask if we could visit. Her voice had been shaky. Whether from emotion or the disease, I couldn't tell. But she'd agreed to see us. The front yard was small but well-maintained, with a swing set that looked recently assembled. Through the window, I could see movement. A small figure watching us from behind sheer curtains. Sarah Coleman answered the door before we could knock. She was smaller than I'd expected, with graying brown hair and tired eyes. But when she looked at us, her face transformed. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You both look just like him." "Miss Coleman," Blake said formally, extending his hand. "I'm Blake Mitchell. This is my brother Daniel." "Sarah, please." She shook both our hands, her own trembling slightly. "Emma's been so nervous. She's been asking questions about you since I told her you were coming." She led us into a living room that was cozy but sparse. Everything looked carefully chosen for practicality rather than style. On the mantel there were photos of Emma at various ages, first day of school, birthday parties, family vacations that were probably just the two of them. "Emma, honey," Sarah called. "Your brothers are here." I heard footsteps, and then Emma appeared in the doorway. She was smaller than I'd expected, with Dad's gray eyes and that same stubborn chin Blake had mentioned. She was wearing a yellow dress and clutching a worn stuffed elephant. For a moment, we all just stared at each other. "Hi," Emma said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi, Emma," I said, kneeling down to her eye level. "I'm Daniel. But you can call me Danny if you want." "Are you really my brothers?" she asked, looking between Blake and me. Blake knelt down beside me. "We really are. And we're really happy to meet you." Emma studied our faces carefully. "Mom showed me pictures of your dad. She said he was my dad too, but he lived far away." "That's right," I said gently. "And he wanted to meet you very much. But sometimes grown-ups make things more complicated than they need to be." "Is he why you came to see me?" Blake and I exchanged glances. "Partly," Blake said. "But mostly we came because we found out we had a sister, and we wanted to meet her." Emma smiled for the first time since we'd arrived. "I always wanted brothers. Mom said maybe someday." Over the next few hours, we sat in Sarah's living room sharing stories. Emma showed us her room, her drawings, her collection of rocks from the beach. She was smart and funny and curious about everything, asking Blake about his job, asking me about photography, wanting to know if we lived together or if we were married or if we had kids. But it was when Sarah stepped out to make tea that Emma asked the question that broke both our hearts. "Are you going to leave again?" she asked quietly, still hugging her elephant. "Mom said our dad had to live far away because of work, but she gets confused sometimes now, and I don't know what's true." Blake reached over and took her small hand in his. "Emma, our dad, your dad, he died a few weeks ago. That's how we found out about you." Emma's eyes filled with tears. He died, but I never got to meet him. I know, sweetheart, and that makes us really sad too. I sat down next to her on the couch. But Emma, Blake and I aren't going anywhere. We're your brothers, and that means we're family forever. Even though I didn't know you before? Especially because you didn't know us before, Blake said. Now we get to learn everything about each other. When Sarah came back with tea, she found the three of us sitting on the floor looking at Emma's photo albums. Emma was explaining each picture in great detail: her first lost tooth, her school play, the time she and Sarah had driven to the coast and built the world's biggest sandcastle. She's never had this, Sarah said quietly to Blake and me later, while Emma was in her room getting ready for bed. Family, I mean. It's just been us. What's the progression like? Blake asked gently. Alzheimer's, I mean. Sarah's expression grew distant. Some days are better than others. I forget words sometimes, lose track of conversations. The doctor says I have maybe 2 good years left before... She didn't finish the sentence. Sarah, I said carefully, we'd like to help. With Emma, with your care, with whatever you need. Your father already did so much. The money he sent. It's the only reason we've been able to keep the house. This isn't about what Dad did or didn't do, Blake said firmly. This is about what we want to do. Emma is our sister. Your family now too. Sarah started crying then, quiet tears that she tried to wipe away quickly. I didn't know if you'd even want to meet her. Thomas always said you boys had your own lives, your own futures. We did, I said. But now our future includes Emma. And we're going to make sure she knows she's not alone. That night, as Blake and I sat in our hotel room planning the logistics of Emma's future, I realized something had shifted between us. For the first time in our lives, we weren't competing. We were collaborating. Danny, Blake said as we were getting ready for bed, I owe you an apology. For what? For 32 years of treating you like you didn't matter. For assuming I deserved everything just because I was older. For never seeing that maybe Dad was wrong about a lot of things. I looked at my brother. Really looked at him. Blake, we were kids. We were both just trying to figure out how to get Dad's attention. Yeah, but you never tried to take mine away, even when you had every right to. He was quiet for a moment. Emma's going to be lucky to have you as a big brother. She's going to be lucky to have both of us. And for the first time since we were children, that felt completely true. 6 months later, I was sitting in what used to be Dad's study, now converted into a homework station, helping Emma with a science project about plant growth. Sarah was in the kitchen with Blake, who was teaching her how to use the new medication reminder app he'd set up on her phone. The transition hadn't been seamless. Moving Emma and Sarah to Oregon had involved lawyers, school transfers, medical records, and 1,000 small decisions about how to blend a family that had never existed together. But somehow, it was working. Emma adapted to her new school, with the resilience that seemed to be a Mitchell family trait. She made friends quickly and threw herself into every activity she could find: art club, junior robotics, soccer. Blake had enrolled her in a private school with an excellent special needs support program for when Sarah's condition required more care. Danny, look! Emma held up her notebook, showing me careful drawings of bean sprouts at different stages of growth. I measured them every day like you showed me. This is incredible work, Em. Dad would have loved seeing this. She smiled at that. We'd started talking about Dad more openly, sharing stories about our childhoods, showing her videos Blake had found on old family computers. Emma had a dozen questions about him. What his favorite food was, whether he liked movies, if he would have liked her elephant, Mr. Peanuts. I think he would have taught me about his business, Emma said thoughtfully, coloring in her bean sprout drawings. Blake says he was really smart about money. He was. But, you know what? He was also really good at fixing things. Remember I told you about the treehouse he built for Blake and me? The one that was crooked but you loved it anyway? That's the one. Dad wasn't perfect at a lot of things, but he tried really hard when it mattered. Sarah appeared in the doorway, Blake right behind her. She was having a good day, alert and present, though she moved more slowly than she had 6 months ago. How's the science project coming? She asked, settling into the armchair by the window. Emma's going to win the whole science fair, I said, earning a giggle from our sister. I'm just trying to do my best. Emma said seriously. Like Dad would have wanted. Blake and I exchanged a look. Emma had developed this habit of invoking what Dad would have wanted for everything from eating vegetables to practicing piano. It was her way of connecting with a father she'd never known, and neither of us had the heart to discourage it. Speaking of doing your best, Blake said, I have some news about the college fund. Over the past 6 months, Blake had thrown himself into managing Emma's financial future with the same intensity he'd once reserved for impressing Dad. He'd restructured the trust, invested the money more aggressively, and even added his own contributions. The account is now at $400,000, he announced proudly. Blake, that's double what Dad left, I said, stunned. I sold some stocks, liquidated a few assets. Emma's gonna have options whether she wants to go to MIT, or art school, or anywhere in between. Emma looked between us, not quite understanding the significance of the numbers, but recognizing that it was important. Will that be enough for college? Emma, that's enough for college, graduate school, and probably a house, Sarah said with a laugh. Your brothers have been very generous. It's not generosity, Blake corrected. It's family. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed and Sarah had settled in to watch her favorite cooking show, Blake and I sat on the back deck with beers, looking out at the garden Emma had convinced us to plant. I keep thinking about Dad, Blake said quietly, about how scared he must have been. Scared of what? Of disrupting everything, of changing the dynamic, of admitting he'd made mistakes. Blake took a sip of his beer. I get it now, you know. Why couldn't he figure out how to tell us? I thought about this. Do you think he knew that he was running out of time? I think he hoped he'd have longer to figure it out. Dad was always a planner, always thought he could control the timing of everything. Blake was quiet for a moment. But maybe this was better. Better how? Because we got to choose. Emma didn't have to wonder if we wanted her around because Dad forced us to accept her. We chose her, Danny, and she knows that. He was right. Emma had never doubted that Blake and I wanted her in our lives, because we'd made the conscious decision to rearrange everything for her. There was no resentment, no sense of obligation, just family. I started seeing a therapist, Blake said suddenly. I looked at him, surprised. After Portland, after meeting Emma, I realized I had a lot of stuff to work through. About Dad, about always needing to be perfect, about treating you like competition instead of family. He stared out at the garden. Dr. Martinez says it's common for oldest children to struggle with control issues. How's it going? Hard, but good. He turned to me. Danny, I know I can't undo 30 years of being a crappy brother, but I want Emma to see us as a team. I want her to know that family can work differently than how we grew up. Inside the house, I could hear Emma's laughter mixing with Sarah's voice as they watched TV together. It was a sound that had become the soundtrack of our new life. I think she already knows, I said. 3 weeks later, I was in my dark room. Yes, Blake had actually converted the mansion's old wine cellar into a professional photography studio for me when Emma knocked on the door. Danny, can I come in? Just a second, Em. I finished hanging the prints I'd been developing and opened the door. Emma stood there holding a piece of construction paper covered in glitter and marker drawings. I made something for you and Blake, she said shyly. It was a family tree with stick figures representing all of us. At the top was a figure labeled Dad with angel wings. Below him were 3 branches, one for Blake with his wife and kids drawn in, one for me with my camera drawn next to my stick figure, and one for Emma with Mr. Peanuts the elephant. But what made me almost cry was the bottom of the page, where she'd drawn another figure labeled Mom Sarah, connected to all of us with a heart that said, "Love makes us family." Emma, this is beautiful. Do you think Dad would like it? I knelt down and hugged her tight. I think Dad would love it. But more than that, I think he'd be proud of the family we've become. And for the first time since this whole journey started, I truly believed that was true. 2 years later, I stood in the backyard of what we now called our house, watching Emma practice her speech for the 5th grade science fair. She'd insisted on researching plant memory. Inspired, she said, by the grandfather she'd never met, but whose curiosity she'd definitely inherited. Plants can remember, she declared to her audience of Blake, Sarah, and me. They remember drought, they remember being touched, and they remember their families of plants around them. Blake applauded enthusiastically from his lawn chair. "That's our genius, sister." Sarah smiled from her wheelchair, her condition having progressed, but her spirit still strong. Some days she forgot our names, but she never forgot that Emma was loved, was safe. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.